Chapter 7. Narcotics, Alcohol, and Psychism. The human body is the temple of the living God. Within it are certain vital centers comparable to doors which open into inner shrines. Using these centers as points of contact, the life forces from the higher planes flow into the physical body through them as an electrical current flows through a wire. And it is through these centers that the Christ force must flow to reach and spiritualize man's various bodies before the redemption or resurrection can take place. By resurrection, we mean the ultimate building up of a spiritual body within the physical by a process of gradually raising the vibrations of its particles to respond to the keynote sounded by the divine or higher self. These centers or doors are normally protected by nature with oily coverings or sheaths compared to both astral and physical matter, which permit the flow of the normal life forces and protect them from all others. These doors should be opened only by a gradual purification and development of the protecting sheath. Normally this takes place as a natural growth resulting from a life of mental and bodily purity and intense spiritual aspiration. It should not be forced or hothouse growth, for each door must be open and closed under the absolute control of the will. Each individual has been given these doors to guard and is held responsible for their keeping. Only as he can master them and in full knowledge open them to the knock of the Christ and close them to his enemies can he hope to conquer. It is only after long training and great spiritual growth that the entities of the astral world can be mastered and held at bay when the doors are opened. In fact, the first and most important work of the advanced disciple is to stand faithful watch over these doors. Keep thou the door of thine heart. The Holy Ghost is the mother principle, or the power of bringing forth. Hence, the destruction of the sheath prevents the bringing forth or manifesting of the Christ force within you. The sin against the Holy Ghost, the unpardonable sin, unpardonable only because it is irreparable, is the separation of the personality from the guidance of the higher self through the destruction of the means of contact. This takes place through the breaking down of the doors or the destruction of the oily sheath that protect the centers leading from the physical into the astral and psychic bodies. Once these sheaths are destroyed, the person is no longer able to close the doors and so becomes an easy prey to the denizens of the astral. Such a one becomes a helpless victim to any and all sorts of psychic imposition and deception. There is no such thing as a lost soul, but it is possible for the personality to persistently refuse the guidance of the higher self and ultimately break away from it entirely and become a lost human animal. The animal life force of such a soulless entity may incarnate several times, each time growing more degenerate, until it has finally exhausted the force obtained during its contact with the soul, and the aggregated atoms disintegrate and return to the elements from which they were gathered. The soul in such cases is not lost, but is indrawn to await a new opportunity to gather up the materials necessary to clothe itself in a personality. There are several abnormal ways in which the oily protecting sheath can be broken down and the doors thrown open, chief among which are the use of alcohol and narcotic drugs. Chemically speaking, ordinary alcohol is ethyl hydroxide. The ethyl, the spirit, vibrates to the highest rate reached by mere physical matter, the point where matter transcends the physical and enters the astral. The ethyl actually functioning on both planes. Narcotic drugs also contain an ethyl element. The ethyl, when taken into the body, immediately seeks to escape into the astral, and it naturally follows the usual avenues of communication between the two planes. But in escaping, it passes through the centers in a reverse direction to the normal current and gradually burns off the insulating sheath until in time they are utterly destroyed, just as an electrical insulation might be burned off by interference with the normal flow of the current. This breakdown may be very rapid, as in the case of habitual drunkard or drug fiend, or it may be insidious and not show markedly for several incarnations. But the result is certain, and every indulgence in the substance mentioned is a step towards the end. Ultimately, this leaves the doors unguarded and open for all the horrors of the lowest astral plane to rush in and take possession of the temple of the living God, thus desecrated. Bulwer Lytton gives a realistic description of some of these horrors in his occult novel, Zanoni. In that story, the student opened the doors abnormally by the use of drugs and, being unable to close them through fright at the sights that met his gaze, was haunted until his death. Tobacco, although classed as a narcotic, does not contain the elements so destructive to the psychic centers. In fact, when not used to excess, is rather soothing. It does, however, injuriously affect the heart and nervous system. From an occult standpoint, one of the greatest objections to its use is its tendency to form a habit. It goes without saying that the aspirant for the spiritual life must be master of all conditions and functions and a slave to none. Hence, while tobacco is not rigidly prohibited in the earlier stages of growth, its use is strongly advised against. Tea and coffee are stimulants, but not narcotics in the sense we use the term, as they do not contain the injurious elements. Their excessive use does affect the nervous system injuriously, although many sensitive persons find that their moderate use has a beneficial and tonic effect, but their use should not be abused. The drunkard and the drug user open the doors while in a state of debauchery, and in such a condition, being particularly unable to defend themselves, they practically invite all the fiends of the underworld to enter and take possession. It is our duty to give our sympathy and help to this class of sorely afflicted ones, for since it took many lives to break down the protective sheath, it will require a long, hard fight to rebuild them. Hence, do not let such unfortunate ones become discouraged. No matter how many times they may fall back into the old habits, every effort to conquer aids in the rebuilding, and the very fierceness of the struggle will ultimately strengthen the soul. But no matter how sincerely they repent, or what spiritual advance they make as a result of the suffering they undergo, when the aura is tainted with narcotics or filled with fumes of alcohol, and until the protective sheath of these centers are rebuilt, it is utterly impossible for a master or messenger from the Great White Lodge to contact or come anywhere near such a one, no matter how great the student's psychic or spiritual development. On the contrary, they will have a bitter fight to keep out their aura entities from the astral plane, and it will require many incarnations of such fighting ere the sheath can be rebuilt. These sheaths are not broken down in one incarnation, but since in each incarnation there is a tendency to repeat the same old mistakes until they are conquered, so in each incarnation there is a tendency to increase the weakness brought over from the past until the final breakdown comes. The rebuilding must necessarily follow the same law, that is, be brought about by gradual accomplishment through determined and persistent constructive effort. We read in the Bible that no drunkard can inherit the kingdom of heaven. In this sense, the kingdom of heaven means the highest spiritual plane, which can be reached only by perfect control of the doors or centers through which alone communion is possible. The Bible does not say that no drunkard can be saved, but that he cannot reach into the higher spiritual realms and come into conscious touch with his Father in heaven until he is conquered. He has destroyed the means of communication, and it is only after earnest and persistent effort through many lives that such a one can gradually rebuild the sheaths, purify the centers, and again make the body a fit temple for the coming of the Christ. Many drunkards desire to stop drinking, but being open to the astral plane, they are unable to resist the urge of these disembodied ones who have passed out of physical life while addicted to drink and have no means of gratifying their desires in the astral world. In order to gratify them, they must come into touch with the physical plane by entering into or obsessing someone on the physical plane ere they can again experience the effects of the drug. On the other hand, there are drinkers who simply say, "I am done with drink," and never touch it thereafter. In such cases, they are unconsciously rebuilding the centers until finally a point is reached where the doors can be closed at will, and it only requires some strong emotions to put the will into effect. This will is often aroused in a dramatic manner at the sudden conversions which so frequently result from various forms of religious excitement. It is only in a normal, purified, strong, and healthy body, with every function of its highest degree of development and every center under perfect control, that the Christ can fully manifest on earth. You can live the Christ life and attain to a high degree of spirituality and take many advanced steps without meeting all these requirements. But you cannot reach mastery without fulfilling all the law. One of the most noticeable karmic results of the use of narcotics and alcohol in past incarnations can be seen in the numerous non-spiritual subjective mediums of the irresponsible type, who are to be found on every hand. Their doors, destroyed in past lives, now stand wide open, leaving them at the mercy of any and every entity who desires to gratify its animal senses upon the physical plane. Truly, their lot is pitiable one, the more so because they know not the terrible dangers they run. Another karmic result of the action of alcohol and drugs is to be found in a certain class of congenital imbeciles whose psychic centers cannot even connect with the ordinary centers of the physical body. In fact, many of them are the reincarnation of the soulless entities mentioned above. They have almost no voluntary control of any but the lowest animal functions, and must finish out their incarnations in a sort of vegetative animal existence. Still another way in which the doors are frequently broken open is by placing yourself in a passive, non-resisting state and making the demand for psychic experience, or sitting for development as it is called. In this practice, you are placing yourself in a negative state in which any entity dwelling on the lower astral plane can help you break open the doors. This either destroys the doors or abnormally forces the development of psychic centers instead of unfolding them as a natural accompaniment of spiritual growth. When results have been thus obtained, since the doors are not under the control of your will, they are open to any entity who desires to obsess you. Even if the obsessing entity is a disembodied friend or good moral character, your condition is not altered, for he must be near you constantly to protect you from the fiends. This is what takes place in ordinary subjective mediumship. As we said in Letters from the Teacher, the difference between spiritual communion and subjective mediumship is a difference both of vibration and method. The right way to contact the higher plane is to raise the vibration of your physical and psychic bodies and their centers until they vibrate in harmony with the keynote of the soul plane, at which pitch no evil things can come nigh thy dwelling. As we can only become aware of a thing when some part of our organism responds to its vibration, the psychic must have the proper development to come into harmony with the spiritual plane ere he can contact the masters or respond to things which touch upon or vibrate within the octave of their keynote. On the one hand, spiritual communication, the psychic, through spiritual living, loving thoughts, and helpful actions in many lives, must build into his or her character enough of the divine principle of compassion for all humanity to raise the vibration of all the bodies, either temporarily or continuously, to the note of spiritual love to which the masters of compassion naturally vibrate. On the other hand, subjective mediumship, the psychic, through various means, either mentally by stilling the thoughts, or physically by various yogi practices such as gazing at a crystal, a black spot, or sitting in a constrained position, through breathing exercises, and many other still more objectionable practices, has gained the power of stilling the physical vibration becoming negative, or when through the oily sheath have become weakened or destroyed, the psychic is naturally negative. In such a state, the physical atoms, not being held together by the vibratory rhythm to which they naturally respond, slow down and fly off to such an extent that they discarnate, entity clothed in atoms of and vibrating to the note of astral plane, which is next to and its lower degree overlaps the earth plane. They can gather up and clothe themselves in sufficient of the physical atoms thus thrown off to temporarily vibrate to the keynote of the physical plane and become temporarily recognizable on that plane. In the first instance, the whole desire of the psychic is to uplift humanity. He is filled with compassion for the race and desire to give himself as a willing sacrifice to bring enlightenment to the world. This is true spiritual development. The teachers and masters whom he contacts do not see the little individual difficulties, or if they do, they understand the law and know that all is working out for the best. The only wisdom can really help. Given wisdom, love, and sustaining help, the disciples can, and indeed must, work out their own personal problems. As Paul said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. All spiritual communication is uplifting, and the spiritual atoms which the psychic has contacted and drawn into his body will rejuvenate and strengthen the physical, uplift the mental, and advance him on the path of spiritual attainment. In the second instance, by giving up the command over the life forces and throwing open or breaking down the doors of the sacred centers, the vitality is drawn upon and the atoms thrown off are used to bring to the physical plane the denizens of the astral. These may be pure or vile, and are attracted to the medium in exact ratio to the state of the atoms which he or she gives off during the negative sitting. If you understand this, and the fact that most of the entities contacted upon the astral plane are not spiritual beings, but merely men and women with their most dense and outer garment, the physical body removed, you will understand the danger of giving yourself up to their use. Since they are using astral sense, they can see farther ahead than those on the earth plane, but such advice as they have to give should be taken just as you would take the advice of any earthly friend, subject to your own good judgment and common sense. Usually such entities are interested in the daily life of the sitter rather than their true spiritual advance. But if evilly disposed or lacking wisdom and a knowledge of the law, they can and often do deceive. They can only come to earth as they left it, that is, clothed in physical atoms. The fact to manifest on the physical plane they must steal physical atoms from the medium and sitters is proof positive of this. Often their desire is to help alleviate earthly conditions, but their advice, while valuable in many cases, is still in accord with worldly standards. In fact, their activity is much like that of a well-meaning but over-meddlesome friend on the earth plane. They desire to help their friends out of difficulty over hard places and often give advice which helps to make money out of the credulity of their fellow men. This, as you can see, but helps to sink the race deeper into the mire of earthly affairs. The first is the constructive, the second the destructive method of communication. In no case, unless they are masters, in which case they will manifest quite differently, as we will explain later, are they different from the people on earth, except that they are functioning in a body composed of finer matter. You cannot always tell which of the above-mentioned methods have been used by the teachings received, for even in subjective mediumship, the teaching may be of a higher moral character, just as some friend might give you a highly moral address. But no matter who the entity claims to be, he will not be a master of wisdom if the subjective method is used, for no master of the right-hand path ever uses that method. In this case, it is not a question of what teachings are given, but how they are given. One absolute test as to which method a psychic is using and from whence the message comes is the effect on the physical body. In spiritual communication, the psychic is clothed upon by spiritual atoms which self-effacement and compassion have drawn to him, and he grows more spiritual. If after the experience his vitality is augmented and a peaceful, happy, and vigorous feeling remains, even for days afterwards, if life seems fuller, trials easier to bear, and love more abundantly, you can rest assured that he has risen above earthly things and has been clothed upon by the Spirit, and has brought back lessons for the benefit of humanity. This is the form of communion with the higher planes it should be desired. But do not strive for it. Let it come as natural growth resulting from a life filled with loving, unselfish thoughts and deeds. In subjective mediumship, however, owing to the loss of physical atoms of vitality, the psychic is depleted and weakened, and soon shows it, not only in bodily health but also in mental power. His nervous system is enervated, his mentality is dulled, and a great stumbling block has been placed in his path. If after communicating the psychic is exhausted, tired, nervous, cross, fretful, and uneasy, even for days, you can rest assured that he has allowed some astral entity to absorb his vitality and contact him by the second and destructive method. It must be remembered, however, that even the psychic who uses the constructive or correct method of communication is far more highly sensitive than the average and hence is easily affected by any lack of harmony in surrounding conditions, either physical or mental, and often suffers from such conditions, although later is able to conquer or rise above them. This is one reason why in all ancient religions the Sibyl or inspired priestess was always surrounded by love, beauty, and harmony, and sacredly protected against all forms of inharmony. We are now nearing the end of the fifth root race of the fourth round, having just entered its sixth sub-race, and are reaching a point where, if we have been diligent, we should begin to lift up our eyes and see our Father afar off and say, "I will arise and go to my Father." Many are beginning to unfold their inner faculties and realize the presence or perhaps hear the voice of the divine guide and teacher and receive messages and teachings from him. While the teachings of the masters are always true, for there can be no confusion since they are all one and give out identical teachings, yet psychics who have never studied the philosophy of evolution and rebirth or the laws of communication with such beings cannot always grasp, hence cannot correctly interpret the lessons given, and much confusion results owing to the intellectual limitation of the instrument they must use or the physical brain. The physical brain cannot grasp or respond to ideas of which the pictures, or at least some conception, the seed so to speak, has not been acquired through the outer sense organs, that is, through study, observation, etc. At this point, there are many, many avenues of deception, hence the great necessity for the pupil to come under proper instructions, and above all to learn that strict obedience to the laws which ages of occult training have proved to be the only safeguards is a necessity, which laws he cannot find out for himself in one incarnation. Nor can he find them out through the guidance of astral teachers, for no matter how well-intentioned such teachers may be, they are still limited to the stage of their own evolution. Hence, only those who have passed through all stages of evolution and have mastered the law can give such training. Such great teachers do not impart this training through astral means, for they have left well-authenticated records and textbooks of their philosophy. Hence, like any other scientific study, only when the student has familiarized himself with the fundamentals of the science will the advanced teacher attempt to communicate with him, for those great teachers know only too well the temptations and deceptions of the astral plane, and their great desire is to protect humanity from these dangers rather than to lead into them. Much better for a teacher to throw a pupil into the water ere he had been told how to swim. Just as a college contains the accumulated wisdom and experience of all who have made discoveries in any line of study, while an individual experimenting alone has only his own experience to guide him and must make many blundering mistakes which a college training would have prevented, so it is in occultism. The Bible is full of references to these psychic centers. Whenever doors or gates are mentioned in the scriptures, the reference is to these sacred centers. The following are a few of the many references. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. The children of Israel were told to take the blood of the sacrificed lamb, symbolizing the Christ force sacrificed in humanity, and strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning. It is a sign that the Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come into your house to smite you. The whole story of Job is but a history of an initiation. In it, Job laments as his chief sin that he opened his door to the traveler, and again he seeks, have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Both of these statements are incomprehensible from any literal point of view, but are plain in the light of the above. Wisdom is spoken of as, she crieth at the gates, at the entry of the city, at the coming in at the doors. In Isaiah we have the invitation, come my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. This is the condition necessary to entering into communion with the spiritual plane, for the doors must be shut to the lower ere they can be opened to the higher. In the New Testament we have these directions as to prayer or spiritual communion. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut the door, shut out all worldly and astral conditions. Pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. A most significant allusion to the necessity for mastery over the doors is given in St. Luke. Strive to enter in at the strait gate. For many, I say unto you, will seek to enter in, and shall not be able. When once the master of the house is risen up, and hath shut to the door, but he shall say, I tell you, I know not whence ye are, depart from me, all ye workers of iniquity. To whom can this dismal apply but to those without the gates? This plainly alludes to the state of development in which we have gained such mastery over the doors that we can shut them to all undesirable influences, even though they have supped with us, and say, Depart all ye workers of iniquity, and make them depart, for you must be the master of your house. Again in St. John 10:1-3 we read, Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. Note carefully the promise given to the angel of the church of Philadelphia in Revelation 3:7-13. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my words, and hast not denied my name. This promise is now being literally fulfilled, as these are the last days of the cycle, and this movement is the open door referred to. The cry of the Christ rings in the ears of every student who reads this lesson. Behold, I, the Christ force, stand at the door, the heart center, and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in unto him, and will sup with him, and he with me. Just as there is danger in opening the doors of the individual, so it is with all spiritual movements. Every movement really sent out by the Great White Lodge is a vital center or door in the great body of humanity, and as such doors are opened, it becomes the duty of every student who enters therein to sacredly guard his door, and see to it that only the Christ force shall enter, else, just as with individual doors, evil psychic forces will pour in. The door, which this movement symbolizes, a door for all humanity. It is the door of the heart center through which the love force is poured out to all the centers. If a movement be established through mere psychism, emotionalism, or the desire of some personality to shine as a teacher, then the evil forces of the lower astral planes are poured out upon its followers instead of the Christ force, even if some of the teachings given out are seemingly helpful. It will be noticeable, however, in some movements that the spirit of loving fellowship is absent, and in its place is a tendency for their leaders to demand personal aggrandizement. Therefore, all the students of the higher life, when confronted with a spiritual movement, should seek in the silence the guidance, not of any mortal, but of their own higher self in regard to it. The question is not merely whether they find in the movement certain things which they can accept while rejecting others, but that they must determine what force is being poured out through the door or movements. For every person belonging to a spiritual movement, as well as its leaders, is absolutely responsible for the force that enters the body of humanity through them, as well as for the force they bring into the movement. If any movement is brought to your attention, and it be a true spiritual movement, it is the open door for you, and comes to you in response to your prayers for more light and help. If it be not a true spiritual movement, then it comes to you as a test of your ability to use your intuition and judgment. Therefore, do not accept the teaching of this or any other spiritual or occult movement until through prayerful consideration and meditation you receive the confirmation of your own divine guidance that it is the open door for your next step.